The moment both you and the avoidant go silent, the avoidant initially feels something that looks like victory, a sense of space, a breath of relief, a feeling that the pressure has finally lifted. They tell themselves this is exactly what they needed: distance, quiet, no emotional expectations pulling at them. They convince themselves that silence feels peaceful, and for a short while that illusion works. Pulling away feels like freedom, like they finally regained control over the emotional intensity that overwhelmed them. But what the avoidant doesn't understand is that silence is not a finish line, it's a delayed emotional impact. It hits slowly, quietly, and with a force that none of their defenses are prepared for. At first, the avoidant tries to settle back into their routine. They distract themselves. They pretend everything is normal. They tell themselves you'll probably reach out again. They rely on the old pattern, the pattern where you fill the silence, where you patch the distance, where you bring the connection back to life. And for a moment, they relax into that old assumption. It gives them just enough comfort to believe the story they always tell themselves: they'll come back. They always do. But as time passes and the silence continues, something subtle shifts inside them. Something they didn't see coming. The silence that once felt spacious suddenly begins to feel heavy. The quiet that felt peaceful begins to feel hollow. The absence they thought they could handle begins to grow into something uncomfortable. The avoidant doesn't admit it, but they feel the difference. They feel the shift in their body first, a tightening in the chest when they think of you, a strange restlessness they can't shake at night, a sudden urge to check their phone even though they expect nothing. Their nervous system reacts long before their mind does. The shock begins when they realize that you haven't reached out. Not today, not yesterday, not at the time you normally would, not in the way you usually did. The predictable rhythm they relied on has stopped, and this interruption feels far more disruptive than your presence ever was. Avoidants feel safe when they believe your heart is still open to them, even if they're not ready to hold it. But when your silence becomes consistent, not emotional, not angry, just quietly steady, they experience something they never expect: fear. Fear not of you, not of the relationship, but of what this silence might mean. It starts subtly. They replay your last conversations. They think about things you said but didn't say clearly. They analyze your silence, even though they don't want to admit they're doing it. They try to convince themselves it doesn't matter and that you're probably just busy. But when the days stretch and your absence becomes undeniable, they begin to face the truth they've always avoided. Distance only feels safe when they believe you're still emotionally tethered to them. This silence, the one you participate in too, breaks that tether. Now the avoidant feels the consequences of their own patterns. They feel the emptiness they once thought protected them. They feel the absence of your warmth, your effort, your care. And it doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It feels like loss. And this is where the first shock hits. They realize the silence isn't temporary. You're not just giving space. You're not just calming down. You're not waiting behind the scenes for them to return. For the first time, they sense that you might be moving on, healing, or simply accepting what they couldn't give. This realization rattles them because avoidants are used to being the ones who decide the pace, the distance, the emotional temperature. But in silence, they lose that control. They don't know where you stand. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you feel. And uncertainty, the very thing they tried to avoid through distance, becomes the thing they are now drowning in. Their mind suddenly becomes louder at night. Thoughts they once suppressed now rise to the surface: regret, curiosity, doubt, fear, longing. They wonder if they misread your patience as permanence. They wonder if they pushed too far. They wonder if they mistook your vulnerability for dependency. And as these thoughts intensify, the avoidant begins to feel something they cannot rationalize away: the emotional cost of losing someone who genuinely cared. The silence they thought they wanted becomes the silence they wish they could break. But pride, fear, and confusion keep them frozen. And in that freeze, the shock grows stronger. They realize the distance doesn't give them relief anymore. It gives them a glimpse of what life looks like without you. And it's a glimpse they can't unsee. There is a very specific moment, subtle, quiet, but absolutely life-changing, when the avoidant realizes you're not waiting anymore. It doesn't happen during an argument. It doesn't happen when you cry. It doesn't even happen when you walk away. It happens in the stillness that follows, in the silence they always assumed would be temporary. Avoidants survive on the invisible belief that no matter how far they pull back, no matter how long they disappear, no matter how inconsistent they become, you will still be there emotionally holding the thread of connection. They rely on it. They depend on it. They trust it more than they trust themselves. But when that thread suddenly goes quiet, when your energy stops reaching for them, when the connection feels different, their entire emotional world shatters in a way they never expected. At first, they don't understand what changed. They just feel something missing, something off, something unsettling. They check their phone more than they want to. They scroll through old chats without meaning to. They hover over your name like their fingers are waiting for instructions their ego won't let them follow. And slowly, they start noticing the difference. Not in what you're doing, but in what you're not doing. You're not texting first. You're not double-checking their silence. You're not trying to fix anything. You're not offering explanations or emotional comfort. You're not trying to keep the connection alive. And that's when the avoidance nervous system goes into a kind of emotional shock. It's the shock of realizing your world didn't collapse without them. It's the shock of seeing you function, breathe, grow, and reclaim your identity in their absence. It's the shock of recognizing that the version of you they took for granted is gone. And for the avoidant, this realization is terrifying. For the first time, the avoidant becomes the one scanning for signs. They start looking for cues in your behavior, your tone, your pace, your presence, to understand where they stand. They notice how your replies feel calmer, more grounded, almost detached in a peaceful way. They notice how you don't overshare anymore, how you no longer stretch yourself emotionally to make them feel safe. They notice that your attention is no longer predictable, that your energy is no longer overflowing toward them. And this lack of emotional access hits them harder than any breakup ever could. Because avoidants aren't afraid of losing people. They're afraid of losing people who made them feel safe without demanding closeness. Your silence, your real silence, the silence that comes from healing, not hurting, becomes the first emotional consequence they've ever had to face. They feel it like a mirror being held up to their face, forcing them to look at the cracks they spent years avoiding. And for the first time, they realize something that shakes them to their core. They didn't push away someone replaceable. They pushed away someone rare. This realization doesn't make them run. It makes them freeze. They stop feeling like the one in control. They stop feeling like the one who can determine the pace. Suddenly, they are the uncertain one. They are the one wondering if the connection still exists. They are the one who feels the fear of loss in their stomach. They are the one replaying memories, trying to figure out where they crossed the line. They are the one imagining you laughing with someone else, giving your softness to someone who values it. And this imagination becomes emotional torture they don't know how to silence. At night, when distractions fade, your absence becomes loud. They remember your patience. They remember your understanding. They remember how you saw them even when they hid behind their defenses. They remember the comfort your presence brought, the comfort they never acknowledged. And they suddenly understand that your silence is not anger. It's evolution. It's transformation. It's you choosing yourself after they took your energy for granted. And nothing shakes an avoidant more deeply than realizing the person who loved them the most no longer needs them. This is the moment they stop pretending. This is the moment their ego cracks. This is the moment their heart wakes up. Because the truth hits them with full force. Your life is moving forward without them. And for the first time, they're afraid they won't catch up. Your silence didn't punish them. It revealed the truth. They thought they had time. They thought you'd always be there. But when the avoidant realizes you're not waiting anymore, their entire emotional story rewrites itself. And that moment becomes the turning point they never saw coming. There comes a moment during no contact when your silence shifts from being a reaction to being a reality. A calm, grounded, emotionally neutral reality. And that shift is something the avoidant never expects, because they spent the entire relationship interpreting your presence as permanent, your care as constant, and your heart as something they could walk in and out of without consequence. But when your silence becomes steady and clean, when it stops coming from hurt and starts coming from peace, the avoidant feels it instantly. Their nervous system registers the shift before their mind does. They feel the difference in your energy long before they understand what it means. Avoidants aren't afraid of you reaching out. They're afraid of what it means when you no longer do. When your silence stops being emotional, it stops being predictable. And unpredictability is the one thing their nervous system can't handle. Your calm distance confuses them in a way nothing else ever has. They're used to your warmth, your softness, your concern. They're used to you noticing when something feels off. They're used to you checking on them even when they pushed you away. So when that pattern breaks, when your silence becomes consistent, they feel it as a threat, not to their independence, but to their emotional safety. They start feeling uneasy without understanding why. They sense something is different, Something is missing. Something they relied on has gone quiet. At first, they try to convince themselves nothing is wrong. They tell themselves you're probably busy. You'll reach out eventually. Everything will go back to normal. But as hours turn to days and days turn to patterns, their calm cracks. Suddenly, the one thing they feared all along begins to reveal itself. They no longer know where they stand with you. Your silence creates a kind of emotional vacuum around them. And in that vacuum, their mind fills the gap with fears they never allowed themselves to feel. What if you've moved on? What if you stopped caring? What if you're finally seeing your worth? What if someone else is giving you what they couldn't? These thoughts hit them like sudden waves, especially because avoidants process emotions backwards. They feel the consequences long after the moment is gone. Your calm, quiet distance forces them into emotional awareness. Not because you're punishing them, not because you're doing anything at all, but because your silence no longer feeds their need for control. They can't predict you. They can't read you. They can't sense your emotional availability. And that uncertainty makes their fear louder than their pride. For the first time, they become the anxious one. They start checking their phone in ways they never did before. They reread your old messages. They wonder why you haven't posted anything. They notice details about you that they ignored when you were still emotionally present. And then comes the moment that shakes them. They feel the calm in your silence. They feel the emotional neutrality behind it. They feel that you're no longer holding tension, longing, or expectation. You've shifted from waiting to healing, from hoping to observing, from reaching out to letting go. That shift is the exact reason avoidants panic. Because once you stop chasing, once you stop filling the gap, once you stop trying to connect, the avoidant becomes emotionally exposed. Without your energy cushioning their fears, their internal world starts unraveling. Your silence is not empty. It's powerful. It communicates boundaries without a single word. It shows your worth without any confrontation. It reveals your strength without any fight. And for the avoidant, this is the moment they start seeing you differently. You're no longer the safe, predictable, nurturing presence they took for granted. You're someone who can pull away completely. Someone who can close the emotional door gently. Someone who knows how to reclaim their power without noise. This realization destabilizes them. They start wondering if they misread everything. They question their assumptions. They doubt their version of the story. And every time they feel the quiet strength in your distance, they lose another piece of the emotional control they thought they had. Silence becomes the mirror that forces them to confront something they never wanted to face. Losing you is possible. Losing the dynamic is possible. Losing the connection is possible. And that possibility becomes the one thing they cannot handle. Because avoidants don't fear closeness as much as they fear losing the few people who truly saw them. Your silence doesn't just surprise them. It awakens them, it shakes them, it exposes them. And once your calm distance switches on their fear, nothing about the dynamic feels safe or predictable for them again. There is a moment during no contact that hits the avoidant harder than anything else, and it almost always happens late at night, when the world goes quiet and the distractions fade away. During the day, they can pretend. They can keep busy. They can bury themselves in routines, work, scrolling, or meaningless conversations. They can convince themselves they're fine, that silence feels good, that distance feels safe. But at 2 a.m., when the mind has nothing left to hide behind, that's when the truth finally surfaces. That's when the avoidant begins to feel the weight of the connection they tried to escape. And it shocks them, because they never expected to care this deeply. It starts with a thought they didn't ask for, a memory of you, a moment you shared, something you said, a look you gave them, a laugh they didn't realize they missed, a tiny detail that slips into their mind when they're trying to fall asleep. They try to shake it off, but the mind doesn't let go. It plays it again, then again, then again, turning something small into something significant. Suddenly, they feel something they've spent years trying to suppress: longing. Avoidants are masters at avoiding emotional pain, but they are terrible at avoiding emotional memories. At night, those memories have nowhere to go. And because your silence has shifted the dynamic, the avoidant starts questioning things they never questioned before. They wonder why you haven't reached out. They wonder if you're talking to someone else. They wonder if you stopped caring. They wonder if they misunderstood your feelings. They wonder if they made a mistake. The same avoidant who once felt powerful in their distance now feels powerless in your absence. Their mind begins running through every last moment between you. They overthink the way you looked at them. They analyze their last message. They regret something they said. They question why they pushed you away. And for the first time, they begin to feel the consequences of their own avoidance. not just intellectually, but emotionally, viscerally, in their chest. The silence that once gave them comfort now creates a tension that keeps them awake. The nighttime is when their emotional avoidance fails them, their defenses are weaker. Their heart is louder. Their regrets appear with clarity they can't deny. They start imagining scenarios. They picture you with someone else. They wonder if someone new is appreciating the softness they took for granted. They fear that someone else is listening to your stories, laughing with you, understanding your heart. And that fear becomes a punch to their ego and their emotions simultaneously. Avoidants rarely admit it, but they get jealous long before they get honest. The thought of you detaching, healing, or moving on without them creates a discomfort they don't know how to manage. They feel replaced before they even know if they were replaced. They feel forgotten before they confirm whether they were forgotten. They feel insecure about losing something they never fully allowed themselves to claim. And that insecurity eats at them when the world is quiet. This is when they start scrolling through your old messages. They reread your words. They look at your photos. They revisit moments you shared, searching for reassurance, trying to find evidence that you still care, that this silence hasn't erased everything. They might even type a message and delete it. They might hover over the send button. They might check if you're online, hoping for some sign you're thinking of them too. But pride stops them from acting. Fear holds their tongue, and the silence becomes a battle between their heart and their ego. At 2 a.m., the avoidant sees the truth they avoided all day. They didn't lose peace by losing you. They lost connection. They lost warmth. They lost the one person who understood them without demanding anything in return. And in the dark, that realization becomes impossible to ignore. They don't cry. They don't break down dramatically. Avoidants rarely show emotion outwardly. But inside, there is a collapse happening, a quiet collapse where their emotional defenses crumble just enough for them to feel the impact of your absence. They finally sense the void left where your presence used to live. They feel the fading of a bond they assumed would wait for them. And they begin to understand that silence is not a neutral space. It's a test of who truly values the connection. Now the shock sets in. They were wrong. Wrong about time. Wrong about your loyalty. Wrong about assuming you'd always be there. This late-night emotional unraveling becomes the first moment they realize something they never expected. You are not theirs to lose slowly. You are simply someone they could lose entirely. And after that night, nothing feels the same for them. There comes a point during no contact when something inside the avoidant begins to break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, internally, in a way they never expected. It's the moment they realize that missing you isn't a choice anymore. It isn't something they can turn off. It isn't something they can outrun, distract themselves from, or rationalize. It's a shift they feel deeply, even if they refuse to name it. And this shift almost always happens when they start comparing who they were with you to who they are now without you. Avoidants don't miss people because they feel abandoned. They miss people because they realize they were emotionally safer with that person than they realized. When your silence stretches, when your energy pulls back, when your presence fades into a life that no longer includes them, the avoidant suddenly feels a kind of emotional hunger they don't know how to handle. Not for attention, not for validation, but for the comfort that your presence gave them without them ever asking for it. This is the moment when missing you becomes unavoidable. At first, they resist it fiercely. They try to reframe it in their mind. They tell themselves they're just nostalgic. They tell themselves they're just curious. They tell themselves they're just wondering how you are. But inside, they know it's deeper. The silence forces them to reflect in ways they never do, and in that reflection, they feel the emotional contrast, the difference between the stability you gave them and the emptiness they feel now. They begin to realize that they didn't push away something overwhelming. They pushed away something grounding. This is the moment they start remembering everything they never acknowledged. How peaceful your presence felt. How steady your love was. How you understood their silence without punishing them. How you offered closeness without suffocating them. How you made them feel accepted even in their emotional confusion. Avoidants rarely admit it, but deep down, they crave emotional safety more than anyone else. And you provided that safety in a way they didn't appreciate until it was gone. Now the emotional discomfort sets in, not dramatic heartbreak, but a deep, unsettling ache. It's the kind of ache that makes them replay old conversations in their head. The kind that makes them search for your name on social media. The kind that makes them wonder if you miss them too. The kind that makes them imagine what would happen if someone else is now feeling the love they took for granted. This ache grows heavier each day your silence continues. They begin noticing things they never paid attention to before: the lack of your good morning messages, the absence of your emotional warmth, the way your presence used to soften their anxiety. They start craving the reassurance they once pushed away. They start feeling the weight of the love they refused to receive. And the emptiness becomes sharper because they know it's their own doing. This is when missing you becomes something they can't escape. Not because you disappeared, but because they finally understand what your presence meant. They feel the loneliness that replaces your emotional support. They feel the regret of not appreciating you when they had you. And they feel the fear of reaching out, because reaching out means facing the truth: they might have lost you for real. Avoidants often assume that people will always be there, waiting, reachable, emotionally invested. But your silence breaks that illusion. It forces them to see that time is not unlimited, that hearts don't stay open forever, that healing doesn't wait for someone to be ready. And this realization terrifies them, because it shows them something they've avoided for years. Closeness is not the threat, losing closeness is. This is the exact moment when they begin to feel something rare: vulnerability. Real vulnerability. The kind that doesn't come from closeness, but from the fear of having waited too long. They don't suddenly become emotionally expressive. They don't rush to confess their feelings. Instead, they sit with it quietly, painfully, realizing they've run out of emotional runway. And now, missing you is no longer optional. It becomes a part of their everyday experience, woven into their thoughts, their memories, their questions, their fears. They feel you in the spaces where you once existed. They feel you in the silence where your voice once lived. They feel you in the moments where your presence used to anchor them. This is the moment they realize a painful truth: that pushing you away didn't protect them from loss. It created the very loss they feared the most. And once they feel this level of missing you, the silence is never just silence again. It becomes a mirror of what they destroyed and what they might never get back. There comes a moment in every avoidant empath story where the entire dynamic flips, and the avoidant feels something they never imagined: the power they believed they had is gone. Not because you took it away, but because you stopped giving it. For so long, they benefited from a cycle they didn't even understand. You reached out, they pulled back. You explained, they shut down. You reassured, they avoided. And every time they withdrew, you followed the script. You softened, you chased, you tried to fix the silence. It wasn't weakness. It was love. It was hope. It was your belief that connection could overcome fear. But the avoidant interpreted it as consistency they didn't have to earn. When both of you go quiet, something unexpected happens. It's not just the absence of communication. It's the absence of emotional pursuit. It's the absence of the energy that always moved toward them. For the first time, they feel the imbalance they created. And they cannot escape the truth anymore. They were not the one holding emotional power. You were. Avoidants run from emotional intensity because they assume the other person wants more from them than they can give. They misunderstand deep love as pressure. But when your silence enters the picture, real silence, grounded silence, healed silence, they feel something unfamiliar: the loss of control over how close or far you stand from them. Suddenly, they don't know what you feel. They don't know what you want. They don't know if you still care. That uncertainty becomes a psychological earthquake for someone who always depended on being the less emotionally invested one. You start living your life again. You start healing. You start redirecting your attention back to yourself. And they feel it, not in obvious ways, but in subtle emotional shifts. Your replies become shorter or less frequent. Your tone becomes calmer, not needy. Your energy becomes focused inward. You aren't asking questions. You aren't filling the silence. You aren't rushing to repair anything. And this lack of pursuit destabilizes the avoidant more than any argument ever could. For the first time, they feel the consequences of their own distance. They feel the emotional separation they once believed protected them. They feel the weight of the connection slipping into your past instead of your future. And it scares them, not because they suddenly want closeness, but because they realize closeness was already there. They were the one who didn't accept it. This is when the avoidant starts replaying everything in reverse. They think about moments you understood them, moments you were patient, moments you listened without judgment, moments you showed up when they didn't ask, because you cared enough to notice their silence. And now, all those moments that once made them uncomfortable begin to feel comforting, irreplaceable, rare. They finally understand the emotional value of what you brought into their life, not because you're gone, but because your silence no longer carries the energy of waiting. And that's when the power shift becomes undeniable. You're no longer the emotionally predictable one. You're no longer the one giving reassurance. You're no longer the one stabilizing the connection. Your silence has become its own boundary, its own form of strength. And deep inside, the avoidant knows something has changed forever. They feel the loss before they admit it. They worry before they speak it. They fear before they act on it. Because for the first time, they need something they don't know how to ask for. Your presence. Not your pursuit, not your reassurance, not your emotional labor. Just your presence. The avoidant begins to see that distance didn't protect them from emotional risk. It created it. Their silence didn't make them safer. It made them vulnerable. And your silence didn't punish them. It revealed the truth. They built emotional walls around themselves only to discover they were the ones trapped inside. Now the fear shifts. They aren't afraid of closeness anymore. They're afraid of losing the last chance to experience it with you. And this fear is the one they don't know how to hide. It shows up in their hesitations, their indirect messages, their sudden appearance after long absence. But behind every small action lies a deeper truth. They feel the cost of losing you, and they can't pretend they don't care anymore. This is the moment that rewrites the entire dynamic. The avoidant is no longer the one controlling the distance. You are no longer the one carrying the emotional weight. And nothing returns to the old pattern again. Because once an avoidant feels the price of losing someone who loved them deeply, the silence stops being something they chose. It becomes something they fear. And that fear, more than anything else, is the final sign that the emotional power has shifted completely and permanently into your hands.